So, now that we finally have a way to fight back, I thought it would be best if we tore apart Visa and MasterCard just to find out exactly how they work. Like really bite down into the bone and discover what makes Visa and MasterCard tick to truly know thy enemy. So, I'm not gonna lie, it took me a week racking my brain, trying to understand as best as I possibly could how the hell do card payment processes actually work. If I'm being honest, my brain is still pounding. So I'm going to do my very best to explain it in the simplest way I possibly can. But bear in mind that even after I do this, you may still not understand it or get it. Not because you're dumb, but simply because this type of information is super complex. So it might take you having maybe a rewatch 2 to 3 times to really understand what the hell is actually happening here. Because the thing is, when I tell you and break it down for you, your mind isn't going to automatically start thinking, so when I swipe my card, the money goes here, and then you see, you'll be thinking about it in real time. So it's going to take a while for you to actually digest and absorb all that information. So, what the hell is Visa? What are they? Who are they? What do they do? Well, for one, Visa isn't a bank. They don't issue your cards, and they're not holding a vault of your cash. The only thing that Visa owns is the road. Picture this, analysts. Picture a massive highway. A highway that is so massive that it interconnects cities across continents. It stretches out that far, while Visa is basically like that. In fact, all card payment processes are basically highways in different regions. It just so happens that Visa happens to be at the most optimal position because their highway touches almost everyone else, probably in the shortest time possible. That's just my analysis. Don't quote me on that. It's not a fact, but I'm just saying that's how I think of it. So, if you drive your payment car onto Visa's road, Visa ensures and makes absolute certain that your payment car, will get to the other side or to whatever bank it's headed to safe and sound. They will even provide it with encryption and F1 jets for escort, top of the line security, just to make sure that your payment reaches the other side and you get your product. That's what they do. So Visa doesn't touch your money. They don't own your account. The only thing they do is that they control the road that your payment goes on or rides on. So now, here's where it gets complicated, because this highway, this massive, incredible network of a highway, is littered and it's crawling with checkpoints and toll booths and middlemen, which I'm about to introduce right now. Now, of course, the first player in this interconnected series of web of intrigue, as Alex Mercer would call it, it's you. More specifically, your bank. Your bank is what is known as the issuing bank. They're called the issuing bank because they issue your credit cards and your debit cards. So you are the first player. The second player is what is known as a payment gateway. So what is a payment gateway? A payment gateway is basically, it's like the security guard that checks your papers, your license plates, and makes sure that everything is on the up and up regarding your account or your money specifically. And then they let you onto Visa's highway. That's basically what they do. They are basically a software that encrypts your info, and if everything's okay, they let you onto the highway. That's it. I hope you're still with me, because now it's about to get a bit complicated. The third player that we have is the merchant's bank. Now, the merchant's bank are basically the seller's bank. However, the merchants themselves don't necessarily plug and play into their bank directly the way you and I do. The merchants have what is known as a merchant account provider. Now, what is a merchant account provider? A merchant account provider is basically the intermediary, the middleman between the merchants themselves and the merchant's bank. The merchant's bank, specifically that bank, is known as the acquiring bank. Those are the ones who acquire the money. Now, you might be asking yourself a question, okay, why don't the merchants simply plug and play into their banks the way we do? Why do they need intermediaries for that? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, the acquiring banks do not want to deal with merchants directly because there is simply just too many of them. You see, one of the main issues is the fact that if the banks themselves were to deal with the merchants directly, right, that means that they would have to deal with cases of fraud, chargebacks, refunds, all that noise and all that fancy nonsense. Manje, so the banks simply do not want to deal with that because, unlike us, the banks already have a risk and compliance department for us, to make sure that we are legit, that the money that we're putting into the system is clean, all that stuff. So they already have that for us. So there's a lot of us, like there are millions of us who actually use the banks and all that nonsense, all that stuff, right? So compliance already has their hands full. So now, if the banks are to deal directly with the merchants themselves, that would mean expanding the role of risk and compliance to make sure that now risk and compliance departments have to monitor fraud and they have to deal with refunds and chargebacks and all that nonsense. So the banks simply, they don't want that hassle. They don't want that headache. So what they do is they have the merchant account providers. The merchant account providers simply consolidate all the merchants together. They collect all their money. They do all the risk and compliance things. They make sure that they handle cases of fraud. They handle the refunds, all that. Yeah, all that gibbly gloop. They do all that stuff. And then once it's all through, they take a consolidated cash flow to the acquiring banks. The acquiring banks' job becomes much easier and less stressful. So that's the players as it stands. I believe, and I'm making an educated guess, but I think this is how most card payment processors actually work. Maybe there are extra additional partners. Maybe there are extra or additional players that I do not know about yet because I'm still studying this thing myself. So I apologize for that. But that's all I have. That's all I know regarding these guys. Does your head hurt yet? Mine does. So you see, Visa is basically the one that is patrolling with the cameras on the road, making sure that no funny business happens on their road and on their turf. So now you might be asking yourself the question, why do banks even tolerate Visa? Why don't they just do the payment processing themselves personally? Well, the thing is, if banks were to do that, if Visa were to leave like tomorrow, utter chaos would ensue. Allow me to explain. You see, Visa is the global traffic police of money. So if you remove them, you can just imagine every bank in the world trying to negotiate one-on-one with every merchant. Fraud would skyrocket and refunds would never end. And your payments, 90% of them wouldn't even arrive to the merchants themselves. So what does Visa do? Visa steps in and brings order to chaos. Visa is the reason as to why, let's say you buy the PlayStation 6, when it comes out, whenever it comes out, right? And let's say that the payment doesn't actually make it there. Maybe let's say you got scammed, right? So what do? You're going to call your bank and be like, guy, I got scammed. What happened? All that stuff. So then, since if the payment was made on Visa's highway, Visa is able to go and be like, trace this payment because it was made on our highway. It has our authentication, so we can trace it. And they will trace that payment all the way to the bank that received that cash. And they go to that very same bank, the merchant's bank, they'd be like, guy, you scammed my client of money, so cough up the money. And the acquiring bank will be like, yeah, sure, sorry, it was my bad, Visa, it was my bad. And they send the money back to your issuing bank, and the issuing bank be like, yeah, man, here's your money, here's your refund, man, sorry about it. So Visa is the reason why you're able to even do that. The reason that your payments even make it to the other side in the first place. Visa handles all of that stuff. They're like, we'll handle all that stuff, we'll take all the heat. But of course, for like a small fee, So Visa is a big deal, man. Like, that is the kind of enemy that we're basically fighting here. That's why they're virtually untouchable. So once again, I stress, Visa doesn't own your money. They don't own your banks. They simply own the railways that your money travels on. And owning the railway system is sometimes more powerful than owning the trains themselves. Now that you know the machine and you understand your enemy a bit better, let's talk about the people that are ruining Visa. How Visa made the single biggest fatal mistake that will haunt them for the rest of their days. Their biggest blunder.